everyone, and welcome back to the show. We are here today with a very special topic here on our Total Wellness Tuesday episode, and that is about, does protein cause cancer and does fasting prevent it? So this is one of the most popular questions I've been getting after I did a show on the mounting evidence against meat about a year ago or so now. So I will absolutely link up that show if you haven't heard of it already before. I will link that up today at stephencabral.com/1782. That is where all of our show notes will live for today's show. So this is a big question. Does protein increase your chance of getting cancer? And by fasting, do you decrease your chances? And so that's the answer that we are going to solve today. And I think by the end of the show, you'll have a much better understanding of the protein issue and the fasting issue. How much protein is too much? How much fasting is actually too much as well? How much do you need on a daily basis? So that's what I hope to solve for you today. Remember, all of these shows are really real world applicable. So yes, I will give you the research, but the research itself has to make sense in the real world. That's what we always talk about on this show. So to start things off, we need to set the stage. How could protein in the first place even cause cancer? That's a really big one. That is why when I did my previous show, the mounting evidence against meat, it wasn't just about meat. That was the headline of the show, but it wasn't the whole show. I am not against meat. I just want people to know that. I help people on a paleo lifestyle, a vegan lifestyle, on a pescatarian lifestyle, whatever they are using for their nutrition. I simply help them live a healthier life using their lab testing results numbers and then also looking at their overall nutrition. It wasn't just about meat though. The study very specifically looked at the amount of meat and again, or the amount of protein, and I will link that up. Now, why would protein be linked to cancer in the first place? We have to understand what goes on in the body. So when we eat protein, we're taking in amino acids. Now, what happens is this, because protein itself is inert, right? When we break down protein, we're really looking at the amino acids involved, the building blocks, the structure of that protein. Well, what happens is when our body takes in more protein and insulin levels increase, a lot of people don't know that, but by eating a huge steak, a big protein-based meal, it actually increases not the glycemic index of the meal, but actually the glycemic load. And we can spike blood sugar levels just based on taking in a large amount of meat at one meal or protein at one meal. Again, it doesn't have to just be meat. So if we're increasing our glucose levels through taking in larger amounts of meat, and again, this is just one example, we also increase insulin levels. But of course, most people, when they take in a large amount of protein, they're also getting some carbs along with it, right? Like you might eat your meat and potatoes, right? And so the potatoes are going to spike glucose to a larger degree than the protein would in the first place. But let's look at this. So let's not even talk about the meals yet. Let's just break down the science. The science shows this. When we take in more protein, when we increase insulin levels, glucose basically, not just, I shouldn't say just glucose levels, but when insulin levels are high in the body because of metabolic syndrome and other factors as well, desensitized cells to actual insulin's response, we have more glucose, we have more insulin floating around the bloodstream. I want to share with you this. Something increases in the body inside of this growth-based phase called mammalian target of rapamycin. We'll refer to it as mTOR for the rest of the show. Well, what happens is this. When your body is in a well-fed state, that means you're getting plenty of protein. Your body has enough of that building blocks. What happens is it stays in more of a growth-based phase. And when mTOR is increased during this growth phase, the cells of the body can easily divide, they can multiply, and they can grow, right? That is part of the process of if you are looking to build muscle mass, so as a bodybuilder or just someone looking to put on more weight, more muscle on their body, you want to get yourself into a higher mTOR-based state. So that is why, especially me, back in my college days, in my early 20s, I was looking to take my frame to as big a size as it could get. That was a real focus of mine. I enjoyed the process. I enjoyed the science behind it. And I was able to take a body that typically sits at the low 160s in terms of weight, maybe like 164 or so, to 200 pounds. That is not my natural size. My natural size is what it is right now. It's about 164 pounds, we'll say, okay? So for me, to get to that state, it took a lot more food. That's really what it took. It took more exercise in a degree, I would say more intense exercise, not necessarily more volume for sure, but what I really needed to do was, in order to get my body to grow, I took in more protein and I took in more feedings in general. Why? Because then my body was getting a constant supply of amino acids. I was eating about 275 to 300 plus grams of protein per day, and it worked. Over a period of just about, I would say 16 weeks, maybe just a little bit longer, I was able to pack on a massive amount of size. Was it all muscle? No, it was not. My body it increased in body fat for sure, but my goal was actually to hit 200 pounds. Now I had to stop, just a little aside, I had to stop at just before 200 pounds. And that is because of the inflammation in my body, the difficulty, literally, I was becoming deconditioned in terms of aerobic-based energy, harder to go up a flight of stairs, like all of those things. I was carrying a lot of weight for my body. I was doing heavy squats, heavy deadlifts, all these things, and it worked. Again, like it worked for me to put on size. I was also using creatine. I was using glutamine. I was using the best of orthomolecular science as well. But it worked, and that's because I put myself in a growth-based phase. Now, that's an obvious, exaggerated example, but do we take in too much protein per day? We'll answer that a little bit later in the show. So here's what happens, though. As our body increases mTOR, it actually shuts off the more of the autophagy-based phase. And we've talked a lot about autophagy on the show. If you haven't heard about autophagy, I would love you to head over to stephencabral.com/1782. I'm going to link up the episodes today on fasting and autophagy, so the big benefits there. But basically, autophagy, which we'll get into in just one second, it's the opposite of mTOR. So it's the cleanup phase. It is the body recycling materials. Now, when mTOR is high and you're in this growth-based phase because you're eating, let's say, every 3 hours, you're not doing longer fasts during the day, your body has plenty of nutrition. And it says, great, we're actually going to forget about this whole recycling thing because we have plenty of nutrients coming in, and it really just focuses on growing the body on that. And that's great, right? Again, like if you are a bodybuilder or you're trying to put on size, maybe you're a little bit more undernourished. Well, this is an important thing to have as well because you don't want to waste away. You don't want to become too catabolic, which some people are. They are actually, especially as we get older, over 65 plus or really over 70 plus, body can become a little bit more frail. It has actually a greater need for mTOR and muscle building and maybe a little bit more protein. So what I'm trying to say is this: protein increases mTOR, okay? There's no doubt about it. And as it increases mTOR, we start to shut off that autophagy-based phase. We know the autophagy-based phase is used there for cell recycling, for cleanup, and it helps to kill cancer cells. That's a big part of it. So here's the issue, though. When our cells are in the growth-based state and we are not using as much autophagy, do you see how it allows for more cellular proliferation? And we know that cancer cells are able to grow at a faster rate with larger amounts of mTOR, with more of this well-fed growth-based phase. So what we have to look at is this. As we are increasing mTOR, we are allowing our body to be in more of a anabolic state, okay? So I want to take you back to Ayurvedic medicine for just one moment. We know that as the body grows, more of the kapha-based state, tumors can grow in the body. We know typically the vata-based state is the undernourished state where that is less likely to happen. Less likely to have high blood sugar levels, more likely to need protein. They're typically they have less protein than their body needs, less protein and carbs, to be truthful. Because one of the ways that I was able to put on size in my body was not just with protein. It didn't do it. I had tried that before. I was doing 250 plus grams of protein many, many times. But here's the deal. When I increased carbs along with those protein, my body began to grow. And so that was a really important factor. So one thing I'd like to share with you as well is that we have to look at the state of the body, because as people begin to put on more and more weight, their likelihood for causing cancer cells to grow as well does go up. And there's really good research. I'll bring you a little bit of it towards the end of the show. But as your body puts on weight, your likelihood for growing cancer cells also increases. Okay, so it's important to look at that. And that's why I'll pull this together in just a moment, but we have to be careful with thinking that weight loss is all about vanity and that we're trying to promote a vanity-based society. We're actually, at least for me, I'm not. I look at weight loss as health, getting to a healthy weight for your body. By being okay with putting on more and more weight and moving towards a higher BMI, chances are you're putting yourself at risk for many other issues, cardiovascular being one, blood pressure, and cancer, because of that body being in that more well-fed, growth-based phase. Okay, so what then is the opposite of mTOR? What is the opposite of anabolism? Well, it's catabolism, right? So we have the kapha in Ayurveda. And if you don't know anything about Ayurveda, I will link up that show category as well. That's at stephencabral.com/1782. So I'll link that up today as well. Fasting-based shows and Ayurvedic-based shows. But think of then in Ayurveda, more of the vata-based state, okay? More of the catabolic-based state. So this is when your body has been in a little bit more of a fasted state. It's not getting as much protein, and blood sugar levels are normalized, right? So blood sugar levels are normal, 75 to 95, at least below 126, and your body's not in a high state of stress. So we're in this autophagy-based state. And it is now dictated, instead of mTOR, it's dictated by AMPK, which stands for 5-adenosine monophosphate activated protein kinase. And as you can see, it's quite a mouthful. We'll refer to that as AMPK for the rest of the show. So think of this. The brake for mTOR, the brake on cancer and cellular proliferation is AMPK, or the state of AMPK. And AMPK allows us, instead of growing with all those amino acids and insulin, to actually activate more glucose and fatty acid uptake. Now you might say, well, that's not necessarily a good thing, right? Because, well, I want to stay in that fasted state. I want to burn more body fat, all those different things. Well, you can still do that. What we have to understand is, as blood sugar begins to drop, and if it does, your body's naturally going to break down stored glycogen, or just think of it as like glucose packages stored away in your liver. It's going to break those down. And it's going to use them to just regulate blood sugar, because you can't walk around with low blood sugar. It doesn't work that way. Your body tightly regulates pretty much all the homeostatic basis in the body. One of them is pH. Another one is the minerals in your body. But that one that we're talking about right now is your blood sugar. So think of this. AMPK is going to use fuel in a state where no fuel is being taken in. So it has to find it somewhere. So it basically just recycles it. You have stored glucose as glycogen in the liver and muscles. You already have some in your bloodstream, so that will help to hopefully lower blood glucose levels to a normal level if it's a little bit higher right now. And it's also gonna break down essentially weak cells. I mean, that's the best thing about autophagy. Hopefully it goes after cancer cells, which it's been shown to do, breaks down necrotic tissue, eats up bacteria, viruses in the body. So being in this fasted state now is the opposite of growth. It's more catabolism. So we actually start to break down parts of the body because we need to find fuel sources in certain packages, and that's what the body does. So just like the best foods for mTOR for growth are protein and insulin, and we'll just say starchy carbs that increase insulin as well, the best fuel sources for AMPK, of course, is being in a fasted state. That's one. But the body actually looks towards, believe it or not, non-starchy vegetables. So think of like your low glycemic veggies and fruit, especially things like berries. Why? Because what it looks at is these polyphenols. We've talked about this before. It's so much more than just calories in, calories out. It's so much more than just sugar, fat, carbs, all these different types of things, your macronutrients. You're actually looking at these micros and these polyphenols, which are very powerful antioxidants contained in the different colors of all your different vegetables. So we have to understand this, is that it's not, again, it's not just about calories. It's not like, okay, I'm looking at 4 calories for these carbs and these proteins. I'm looking at 9 calories per gram of fat. It's not just about that. Okay, your body uses what nature already has predisposed it to needing. So when we look at meats and proteins and, I would say even fats, there's not a lot of bright colors. We need those bright colors from our fruits and our veggies. So that's what's activated and being used as part of this AMPK and autophagy-based state. That allows us to break down when there's been a little bit too much growth. It allows us to find fuel when we're in a fasted state. And yes, ketones can be a part of this, but typically, unless you're adding endogenous ketones, which I'm not necessarily a huge advocate of, because then you're not necessarily working with the processes of the body. But again, you can make ketones, and we actually use that as part of our 21-day functional medicine detox. We use that as part of the first 3 weeks of our Fatlocity program. But then again, we're transitioning it out because you don't want to be in a static catabolic state for too long. And that's why I fear that a lot of people on a keto-based diet and too many people on a super low carb diet are in too high of a catabolic state for too long, which increases stress in the body, and that's not necessarily a good thing, right? Eventually that can become too great, and it can start to shut down thyroid levels, female hormones, etc., and low testosterone. So that's a big part of it. One other thing that I wanted to bring you this as well is that when we're in this fasted state, when AMPK levels are increasing, we actually bring out a lot of those anti-aging based factors that we look for. The big one that many people have talked about over the last couple of years is NAD, which stands for nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, NAD, and we're trying to replicate that through certain nutritional supplements, vitamin B3 being essentially the core vitamin that starts this process, and then moving to nicotinamide riboside or nicotinamide mononucleotide and trying to create what's called NAD. But what we want to understand is that our body can actually make this on its own in a fasted-based state, or in a state where AMPK levels are higher and mTOR levels are lower. So it would also then stand to reason that we need both of these. So for example, let's look at this though in its context. If you are looking to put on as much muscle as possible, you would want to not do longer periods of fasting. You just wouldn't. Now, there's a lot of people who try to refute that, but the truth is you can always, there's always an outlier. There's no doubt about it. But if you want the simplest way to do it, you're going to feed your body, and you're going to make sure that it's in a constant state of growth, okay? There's no doubt about it. It's an easy way to do it. You're going to make sure that it just doesn't drop in these states of autophagy. But is that the healthiest? The truth is no, right? So one of the reasons why I like to maintain the body weight that I'm at right now is it's healthy for my body. That's one. But the other is that I'm not I could put on, with not too much difficulty, another 12 pounds, maybe 15 pounds, and maintain that fairly easily. And I have, and I would have more muscle on my body, and all of that would be fine, right? Fine from a vanity standpoint, fine from that standpoint. But the truth is, it's not actually what's healthiest for my body. So I'm in a state right now where I'm happy. I'm good. This is where I want my body to be, because it's where the healthiest stage for my body is to be. I've been on other diets, specifically all plant-based or vegan-based, and my body dropped another 15 pounds from where it is right now. And I was more catabolic, because the truth is that meat is more anabolic than vegan-based proteins. You can get the same amount of protein per day through vegan-based foods. There's no doubt about it. But when we actually look at a lot of those branched chain amino acids, and we look at the levels of leucine inside of meat and other items like that, it's difficult to replicate with vegan-based protein. Now, again, you can be a vegan bodybuilder, and there's no doubt about that. It's just easier when you eat a lot more meat. But it's also why the studies that I brought up have shown that the more meat you eat, above 19% of your total calories for the day, very likely could increase your chances of cancer. Not definite, it's not going to happen to everyone, but we do know that about 1 out of 2 people will get cancer within our lifetime, anybody listening to this show. So we have to be careful with that. Now, is it just meat that's causing cancer? Of course not. Of course not. And in my book, The Rain Barrel Effect, I talked about pesticides. I talked about heavy metals. I talked about other factors. There's just no doubt about it. But I also wanted to be fair. In that same study, it showed that as plant-based proteins increased as well, so did cancer. Okay, so it's not just meat. It's just meat started to get much more prolific after 10% of the calories from your diet, whereas vegan-based proteins was more like 19%, right? So when I'm talking with people, we really want to understand that we need both of these processes, okay? It's just not so cut and dry all the time. If you are someone that is more catabolic, guess what? You need a little bit more anabolism, right? That's what Ayurveda teaches us and has taught us for 6,000 years. If you are someone that is more of a kapha body weight, and puts on mass more easily, puts on weight more easily. You just need less protein in your diet. You already have more mass. You're prone to putting on more mass, okay? And that's great if you're looking to put on more mass and build more muscle. Well, you're already genetically more predisposed, but it's more dangerous. You have to be more careful for you of those insulin levels and that protein. Where if you're more of the Vata body type, the ectomorph, you need a little bit more. Now, should you go overboard? No. And I'll wrap that up in just one second, but I wanted to bring you a very interesting theory to end the show. And that's why it's never so cut and dry. This was about a year ago in like 4 months, this was proposed as a new theory. And I'm going to link this up. It was from the Royal Society. It says, we propose that once cancer cells have started to grow in vivo, AMPK switches from being a tumor suppressor. So remember, in a fasted state, being in a fasted state, increase in autophagy, AMPK goes up. It's a tumor suppressor. It helps to kill cancer cells, remove them from the body. However, when a cancer cell has already started to grow, meaning proliferate, what happens is basically they called it AMPK switches from Dr. Jekyll. It's Dr. Jekyll to Mr. Hyde, right? That was it? Yes. And it says in these circumstances, the role of AMPK is to now protect the cancer cell which has been expressed, irrespective that that cell has now no longer a normal cell. So very interesting, so that it's using now fuel sources for this cancer cell. So it's not always cut and dry. My goal is for you, hopefully, not to get cancer in the first place. Always better to not get it in the first place than have to figure it out when you already have that dis-ease of the body. So in summary, it is always about balance, right? It is about balancing the body. It's about making sure that you are not wasting, that your body's not becoming too thin, because that leaves you more susceptible to immune-based issues. And that's why older people get sick far easier. They have easier and more prone to different falls, to breaking their hip, to weaker bones. So we need to make sure they're getting enough protein. But it's like that spot, right, from like 35 to 65. We just have to be a little bit more careful where we're more prone to cancer and cancer cells growing during those ages. So remember, there's a direct causal relationship as well between obesity and cancer risk. If you are overweight right now, lose the weight for your health. Forget about the vanity. If you want to get to a certain size, then fine, that's fine, but do it for your health. That's really what it's all about. So as that BMI creeps up above 25, we need to bring that back down, especially above 29, which signals obesity. Okay, the other thing is this, is that most people, even if they're on a higher protein diet, most people would benefit greatly from getting in that autophagy, from getting in more of that fasted state. And that means that most people would benefit from a 12 to 16 hour fast, okay? The more hours typically before midnight, the better, meaning your fast shouldn't end up necessarily going until noon or so. It can, but it's not as ideal as starting it instead at 5 or 6 o'clock at night. I have many shows in that. I'm already over my time for today. So I'll link up those shows on fasting as well, and why that's better, and why Ayurveda taught us that many thousands of years ago. And the last thing is this: how much protein is too much protein, right? Protein's not going to cause cancer. A proliferation inside of the body, an anabolic state that goes on for too long inside of the body, is what's going to cause cancer. So protein can lead to it, yes, but only if it stays in that state for a prolonged period of time. So let's look at it this way. Most people, they need about 0.8 grams per kilogram of protein grams per day, right? Easiest way to think about it is this: be active, move the body. Here's the deal: about half your body weight in protein per day. If you weigh 160 pounds, about 80 grams per day. Now, you can do a little bit less. There's no doubt about it. If you're more active, you might need a little bit more. For people that are very active, and especially more of the Vata-based body type, you could certainly get close to, or Vata-Pitta, close to your body weight in grams per day. But not if you're trying to lose weight. So let's say you're 200 pounds and you want to be 150 pounds. Well, eat for 150 pounds, 150 grams of protein per day, right? But again, if you're trying to lose weight, you don't need all that protein, okay? So we want to lower that somewhere between like 50%, right, of your body weight in grams per day to a 1-to-1 ratio if you're very active. There will always be exceptions to the rule. So if you're working with a practitioner and they are qualified, feel free to listen to their advice. The last part is this: one of the greatest signalers for AMPK is exercise, right? So if your body is not moving at least 10,000 steps per day and getting in a few real workouts per week, I highly recommend doing that. That can oftentimes offset this greater anabolic state. Why? Because exercise is naturally catabolic. A lot of people think it's anabolic. It's not. Exercise is catabolic. It is the rest and feedings afterwards which rebuilds the body. So hopefully today's show was helpful. Much more to come in a couple weeks. I'm going to go over the 5 stages of fasting, how that works inside of the body. So hopefully you stay tuned. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. Do feel free to share the show with anyone you believe it could serve. And for more information, head on over to stephencabral.com/1782 for the show notes and links. Take care.